Okay, so let us now begin with the third volume of Victor Frankenstein. And this novel begins in a way just as if to remind you all about what is the situation which Victor Frankenstein finds himself in uh, by the sequence of events that have happened thus far. So it begins again with the same note with which uh, our text and the first two volumes pretty much, in a sense, initiate the discussion, the key discussions of this text, one of which is domestic comfort, domestic bliss, marriage, companionship, uh, uh, and family life, human affections. So here we find that Victor Frankenstein's father comes up with a proposal that Victor marries Elizabeth and what he thinks of the plan, etc., etc. And there we find that Victor Frankenstein, though he is in a state of psychological turmoil, he accedes to the request of his father, and he thinks that the sooner, in a sense, he finishes his job, his task, which was to make a mate, a companion for his creature, that he would uh, go on to start his own family life, in a sense, settle down with his own partner and mate, that is Elizabeth. So, this uh, parallel is again very, very crucial to the text. The fact that Victor Frankenstein, by the end of the previous volume, had promised the creature that he is going to make a companion, an Eve, in a sense. So, if Victor Frankenstein, he assumes godlike powers in the text. So, in a sense, just like Adam asked for a partner, and God granted his wish and gave him Eve as a partner. Uh, so, in a sense, the creature is making a similar kind of a plea. He has made it, in fact, convinced Victor Frankenstein, and he has agreed or agreed to the request of his creature. Uh, and Victor Frankenstein now thinks that first he would comply with the demands of his creature and then marry Elizabeth and put an end to his miseries of being tormented by the creature. Uh, this is what he says on page 120. He says that he would not want to increase the doom or danger on his family, and that he would get rid of this weight hanging across around my neck. Again, a reference to the rhyme of the ancient mariner, the albatross that hangs like a reminder of guilt and sin in the neck of a sailor. So you can look up that text and see what the reference is about. Primarily, that albatross is a sign of guilt, that the sailor kills a creature, the albatross, and it hangs around his neck until he is absolved of his crime. So he feels similarly carrying that burden, and he says that I must perform my engagements and let the monster depart with his mate before I allowed myself to enjoy the delight of an union from which I expected peace. So even at up till this point, he is, in a sense, this is a moment, or this is that point in the narrative where he can redeem himself. The redeem himself by doing a justice to the creature with whom he has been unjust. Okay, and uh, and he says, and the passage continues, and he says that there is a line. Please make a note of that when you read it. He says that put an end to my slavery forever. So now you see that, in a sense, that equation, in a sense, is reversing. He himself, although he was the master of his creature, the creator of his creature, now by virtue of having been irresponsible, caused grave injustice to the creatures, and he has now, in a sense, become the victim of the creature's retribution, and now he is the master of Frankenstein's destiny as we go along in the text. And Frankenstein feels now like a slave bonded to his creature and his demands. Okay. Uh, and in a sense, but he cannot, he's now back home and he cannot go on make that creature in close proximity to his near and dear ones. So he devises a plan that for 2 years or so he would go to England, and there he would, in a sense, complete his work, and by then he would be in a calmer state, and then come back home and marry Elizabeth. Okay. Uh, okay, and he doesn't want to, in a sense, uh, upset his father. And again, that, as I told you, that this volume again begins with a reminder of some of the major themes in the text. And on the second page of this chapter, page 122, second last paragraph, he again brings this thing in view that uh, for a more indulgent and less dictatorial parent did not exist upon earth. This is when he refers to his father, and they have had a discussion about Victor Frankenstein's marriage and Frankenstein's plan to go abroad and study some more. And he uses that classical Enlightenment education argument that before he settles down in life, he would want to travel the world and, in a sense, get better acquainted with uh, the knowledge of the world and his own profession, etc. And then ultimately, after finishing his education, remember, a tour traveling to different countries was part of this Enlightenment program of education for a gentleman. Okay, and then after having done so, he would settle down in marriage with Elizabeth to domestic bliss and comfort. Okay, these ideas are typical Enlightenment philosophy. Okay. Uh, and then he informs, and Henry Clerval, in a sense, is to join him, and that they would travel England, France, etc., etc. Okay. Uh, and and then he tells about his plan to Elizabeth, and uh, again echoing the same Enlightenment philosophy and idea sentiment of the primacy and the importance of domestic bliss. Okay, as opposed to a consuming passion for your own uh, goals and ideals. That is a very typical romantic idea. That is not an Enlightenment idea. The Enlightenment idea is that you become rational, useful, domestic creatures living a settled, calm life, and uh, fulfilling your obligations towards your public duties and your personal domestic affections, and live in a piece of calm, a settled course. Okay, as opposed to the heightened passions and great expeditions uh, of a more romantic kind. Okay, so this is important. He says to Elizabeth, "We shall be united, and neither hopes or fear arise to disturb our domestic calm." Okay. Uh, in fact, this is his father's words, not Frankenstein. So again, I mean, Frankenstein is playing into the Enlightenment model that his father espouses and pushes forward by saying that, okay, give me this time to study, pursue my dreams, and then I will settle down. Okay. And that's what his father hopes, that after he's finished his education, that we shall all be united as a family, and neither hopes, heightened hopes, or disturbing fears arise to disturb our domestic calm. Okay, very crucial, important ideas. And if you look at the text in general, take a long overview of the text, take a long shot of whatever has been happening in the text. This text is actually a conflict between domestic bliss, where the women play a crucial role, okay, and the romantic quest of an individual, of a sole individual, the quest of a kind which consumes the individual completely, okay. uh, and if you uh, think more about the text, it would, if you look at it structurally, you would see that as Frankenstein, the problems in the Frankenstein household start when Victor Frankenstein goes away from his family. Okay, firstly, his mother dies. So that is a signal, in a sense, a kind of a foreboding of things to come. The mother, the person who, in a sense, is key to domestic bliss and affections, domestic ties, the nurturing and caring of the children, etc. When she dies, although she says that Elizabeth should continue in her place later, it is after her death that Victor Frankenstein, in a sense, leaves. Okay, and going away from the family, he forgets his familial affections in the task of creating a being, a creature, again without any female uh, generative participant in the act. And then subsequently, now he has promised, but we all know, if you have some idea of the novel, that ultimately he denies the creature the only possible uh, means of redemption that he has, that of that giving the creature female companionship, a partner, okay, with whom the creature can enjoy domestic bliss. But there is a slight complexity to that. We'll come to it in a moment. Okay. Again, on this page 121, you'll find he again mentions about he being a slave of the creature, etc. Uh, and he's worried about his family's well-being, etc. If he does not go on and make a female being a partner for the creature, he worries that in that case the creature would be angry and destroy the rest of his family. Okay. uh, and he hopes that by the time he would return home he would be a free man, and he is joined by his friend Henry Clerval. Okay. uh, and when they are traveling, you can see he mentions to the contrast between the kind of effect outside external objects, particularly scenes of nature and of course of civilization, have on Henry Clerval. Remember, they are going to new countries, so they ought to be excited. But he draws a contrast between himself and Clerval, and he says, page 122, the top of the page, how great was the contrast between us. He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise, recompense a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colors of the landscape. This is what it is to life. This is what it is to live, says Henry Clerval. Okay. He's a very poetic kind of a figure, is Clerval. Okay. While he himself looks at the scenery outside, whether it be nature or new places, with an eye of mourning, feeling great agony and pain. Remember the idea of the romantic agony that the romantic hero suffers, and he's a flawed one. Okay. Romantic heroes always have some kind of a flaw, although. Whereas Henry feels that he's been transported into some kind of a fairyland, picturesque, beautiful landscapes that he sees around, that is on page 122-23. Okay. And Clerval, in a sense, is almost likened to William Wordsworth. Page 123, there is a reference to poem which we have covered, Tintern Abbey. Okay. And it's a kind of, if you should remember that this stanza in the poem is about the young Wordsworth when he visits Tintern Abbey and how excited he is. Okay, the sounding cataract haunted him like a passion. Uh, the tall rock and mountain, etc., etc., an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm by thoughts supplied or any interest unborrowed from the eye. So, this is uh, a pure immersion into scenes of nature and its overwhelming power upon the human imagination, and this is what Henry Clerval is characterized as. In fact, Victor Frankenstein's narrative says that it is as if Henry Clerval is formed uh, in the very poetry of nature. Okay, is a being formed in the very poetry of nature. His wild and enthusiastic imagination was chastened by the sensibility of his heart. Okay, so not quite the young Wordsworth. Okay, so as we read, who was full of passion, but here Henry Clerval is a passionate individual, and of course, his passion is uh, tempered by a sense of refined sensibility as well. This is what Victor Frankenstein says. Now, again, bring in a contrast to the reference here, the contrast between the creature. How is the creature created? He is created by Victor Frankenstein out of pure scientific reason, chemical experiment, etc. No sensibility, no affections. Nothing of this sort is involved in the creation of that being that Victor Frankenstein creates. And here, Victor Frankenstein calls Clerval a being formed in the very poetry of nature. Okay, as if nature was a part of the formation of the character Henry Clerval. So look at these sort of examples and contrasts. Uh, and he echoes it, and then while recounting the entire story, in a sense, he becomes a little sentimental and morose. Victor Frankenstein, and because Henry Clerval, as we will find out, dies. Okay, so premonition of it, a sense of it, is already given to us in this chapter. So it is not that kind of a suspense thriller. So that is not the driving impulse of the narrative, that now you're going to find out about some murder happening. You always already know, in a sense, what is impending. So that is a difference, slight difference between popular fiction of the period, especially the Gothic genre, which is driven by a sense of this sudden sudden coming into view of the monstrous, etc., and some cataclysmic murder event happening. But in a sense, here we already know. Okay. Uh, okay, and he says that where does he now exist? Talking about Henry Clerval. In this gentle and lovely being lost forever, has this mind so replete with ideas, imaginations, fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world whose existence depended on the life of its creator, has this mind now perished? In a sense, Frankenstein can now comment critically, not on himself, but it's a critical comment either intentionally made or, I mean, Mary Shelley is making this point, in a sense, amplifying this point, and says that uh, while Victor Frankenstein is lamenting the loss of his only close friend, Henry Clerval, he calls Victor Frankenstein a creature, a man of imagination, fanciful, magnificent mind and ideas, page 124 top, says whose existence depended the world that he created, a world of magnificent ideas, imagination, which Clerval could create and enjoy, indulge in. It depended on the life of its creator, that is Henry Clerval. Okay, his beautiful mind, his sympathetic mind, his uh, his mind, which is fascinated by poetry, romantic poetry, oriental poetry, etc., could be only he could only create that because he himself had those qualities in him. Remember Blake, the lamb and the tiger, the qualities of the creator manifesting in his creations. Okay, again, this comparison is drawn between an intellectual act of creation, the creation of poetry, beauty, okay, but the perception, the ability to perceive it. Okay, now you think of Coleridge, Ode to the Dejection, where he talks about you can create and see, perceive beauty outside when you yourself have that inside you. Okay, Victor Frankenstein, I mean, he had this great overpowering ambition to, in a sense, usurp the power of nature, usurp the power of the feminine principle in creation. Uh, okay, so it's a critique of the phallocentric view of science and reason, etc. Okay, but we find that he is becoming sensitive and he is, in a sense, gushing with sorrow, etc., overflowing with the anguish while recounting the happiness of Clerval when he was alive and they were traveling, etc., etc. So now Victor Frankenstein, while talking about Henry Clerval, uh, in a sense, becomes more, in a sense, sentimental himself, but be very, very, um, be very, very focused and alert rather to the fact that Victor Frankenstein is always more sensitive and sensible to things concerning himself. Okay, he is probably not. What is he mourning? He is mourning the loss of his dear friend. So he is unable to sympathize with uh, sorrows of the other. Okay, he's still mourning a loss which he, in a sense, is pained by. Okay, of course, the loss of a beautiful man like Clerval, but the pain it has caused him. Okay, probably unlike and contrasted with the creature who was moved to tears by the sight of people who, the De Lacy family, and their acts of kindness, their sharing of joys and sorrows. He was moved by them without even knowing them really. I mean, the creature, in a sense, is shunned by them when they confront him. But he is able to shed tears for the other. Okay, the one he does not even know. Okay, it is later that subsequently he feels enraged. Now, there is another point here that you should keep in mind that that's what makes this narrative so beautiful and complex and worth studying still, that it's not clear black and white, of course. And if you remember, what makes the creature, in a sense, determined to take revenge against the human race? It is, and then he goes on to kill William, and subsequently Justin also dies, etc. And then now Clerval has died. Uh, Clerval would die later. We'll come to that. Sorry about that. So he's already killed two people by effectively the creature. So what makes him determined to take revenge against the human race? It is the fact that he is not allowed to participate in human affections society through an act of sympathetic engagement. Okay, so that is again, in a sense, in a way, to that is again the Rousseauian idea that comes into our picture, that Victor Franken, the creature, in a sense, compares himself to the other and feels aggrieved by not having access to human society and sympathy. And we already see traits in the creature of competition when, in a sense, he, in a way, competes with the Arabian girl Saifi, and he, in a sense, has already started feeling worthy. The idea of self worth has already, in a sense, been inculcated in the creature. Because why does he think that he would be accepted by the De Lacy family once he's overcome his physical appearance? The answer to this is that he already feels that despite his looks, he is a creature of worth. So he has already inculcated this idea of self worth. of competition, that he is better at learning that the Arabian girl Saifi. If you go back to that part of the narrative, you will find that. And this idea of self-worth, how has he learned it? Of course, he's read texts. Okay, he is come into being contact with society through observation, through literature, and that, in a sense, makes him more competitive in wanting to fit in. But I mean, I'm not saying it is a wrong thing or something of that sort. It is just an idea of Rousseau, which Mary Shelley is, in a sense, mobilizing in the text, and she would not agree completely with with Rousseau on many accounts, but for the time, just keep that in mind. Okay. Uh, okay. So, moving on to the next chapter. Okay, for the next chapter, now we find that that Clerval desired the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time, typical Enlightenment style education, polite, learned conversation with people in educated society and circles, etc., etc. But for Victor Frankenstein, we find that he is becoming more and more like the creature now. Okay, there's a very interesting sort of this complex of the creature and the creator, which keeps happening continuously throughout the text. Okay, page 125, if you see, uh, uh, he says, when talking about how human company has now become irksome to him, there is a line where he says that I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. Page 125, top of the page, top paragraph. I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. Okay, this is something what the creature is saying. He's not quite man, but he thinks that he's like them, and yet, because of his outward appearance, he has felt that there is a barrier which is insurmountable for him, uh, and he cannot cross that barrier and be and participate with his with the fellow human race. Fellow in the sense that he is made in the image of man, if not made in the image of God. So this is another sort of a nice line I came up with by accident right now, that in a sense, and it's a crucial idea if you think of it. uh, Adam was made in the image of God, and but he is, in a sense, one in a sense, step lower than God in the hierarchy. Definitely not one but two. Okay, he's not quite the angel also. uh, Similarly, the creature that Victor Frankenstein creates is also, in a sense, hierarchically lower in the order of being. Okay. Uh, so he cannot participate by virtue of that with his fellow beings. Now, is it a way of saying, or is it uh, a way of, in a sense, commenting upon Victor Frankenstein that now he has become beneath man? In a sense, he's now become lower in his own eyes, or not lower in the sense, incapable of participating in normal human life. And by the end of the text, we'll find that, in a sense, he becomes incapable of having uh, a regular human existence. But of course, he's narrating his tale to Robert Walton, so he at least has that outlet to him, whereas a creature can only talk to his creator, Victor Frankenstein, narrating his story and his request and his angst. Okay, so this is crucial. And he says that, but in Clerval, I saw the image of my former self. He was quite inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. The difference of manners which he assumed, which he observed, was in him an inexhaustible source of instruction and amusement. Again, another way of enlightenment education, learning from the manners and behavior of different people in different society. And then the most of this chapter, you'll find a lot of places are named, a lot of evocation of English history, and how, in a sense, Clerval is interested in all of that, while Victor Frankenstein, what could have been such rich sources of education and enlargement of his mind and mental capacities, don't have any effect on him. Okay. Uh, also, uh, he compares himself to that tree which was blasted by the lightning, remember, in the first volume, which gave him that, which sowed the seeds of love for natural philosophy and science in the mind of Victor Frankenstein. Page 126, third last line, he says, uh, or rather, if you look at this paragraph itself, again, that contrast between how he started as a man who uh, who in a sense was made for peaceful happiness, and he was always content in his youth, etc. But ultimately he says that but I am a blasted tree now. So that blasted tree image, he himself becomes that blasted tree which inspired him to pursue science. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others and abhorrent to myself. This is again echoing the words of the creature. Okay, the creature has become, in a sense, uh, uh, abhorrent to himself, because he himself has become, in a sense, sinful, vengeful. His own existence, in a sense, torments him, and this is the same what happens to Victor Frankenstein in due course. Okay. uh, and all this reference to the various places that Victor Frankenstein and Clerval visit, and also the fact that they tour the, apart from major cities of the British Isles and Europe, they not don't go to the main cities of Europe, but primarily also the outskirts of various European countries, especially England. Okay, this is also a record of the fact that during the Romantic period there was a emerging interest in touring and traveling through the countryside, and through the the districts where, and he visited the Lake District, in fact, where the Lake poets lived, Southey, Coleridge, and Wordsworth. Uh, and this is, in a sense, Mary Shelley recording the interest shared by herself and P.B. Shelley also, and others. In fact, a lot of stuff in the text is inspired by certain autobiographical details. Some of the facts which you would have read in the introduction, if you haven't, please read how Mary Shelley struggled with the idea of motherhood, how, in a sense, her mother died in the process of Mary's birth, and how Mary's own uh, child died quite young, an infant. Uh, so the difficult, all these ideas, and P.B. Shelley's initial interest in sciences and alchemy, etc. So all these details are useful, but not so much so that, in a sense, your answers or your arguments and assignments could be based on them solely. So there would be additional, in a sense, information, but have to look at the theories and the various ideas and concepts that we have discussed while discussing the text. Okay, anyway, uh, ultimately, we find that uh, Victor Frankenstein says that he would like to continue with his, or rather, that that Victor Frankenstein would want to continue his rest of the tour alone, and he says Clerval, in a sense, stays back in Ireland, goes to Ireland, and Victor Frankenstein goes to a remote part in Scotland, which is in a sense up north, away from the mainland, and goes to the Northern Highlands, which are a more, in a sense, remote part of Scotland, where he would want to finish his or color start begin fulfilling the promise of the creature of making another mate. Okay. So again, these settings are the setting of the scenes are important. Going to an obscure part of Scotland, and the description there you will find is that of high rocks, waves splashing on the rocks, etc. Desolate kind of a place. I mean, often used in such settings would be found again in Gothic novels, etc. Also, romantic landscape, romantic paintings, etc. Okay, one man struggling in this sort of a landscape. Okay, also connotes that he is away from, in a sense, quote unquote, the picturesque and the beautiful in nature, and in a sense at the liminal site of the sea and the rocks. Okay, in an obscure part. Okay, so chapter 3, the first page itself, in a sense, is very, very crucial. On the first page in chapter 3, you would find that a very central, crucial moral dilemma starts plaguing Victor Frankenstein. Okay, and initially, I mean, even I thought that Victor Frankenstein is completely, in a sense, in the wrong. He's doing great injustice to the creature by denying him a mate. But on close reading, what I found was that is actually quite a dilemma for Victor Frankenstein, and particularly if you consider it from this point of view. We'll come to it as we start. Okay. While making the creature, he has this train of thoughts, which in a sense leads him to think, and he feels that he is now about to create another being of whose dispositions I was alike ignorant, like he was about the creature. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate, and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not, and she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated upon earth. Had I a right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? Okay, now what is the dilemma? The dilemma is this, that he has created a being, okay, who has become vicious and vengeful owing to his unjust circumstances or his unjust treatment at the hands of the human race, starting with his creator. Now he says that what's the guarantee that he creates another being? Again, I mean, when in his argument, if you see, he is missing out this point that the creature becomes dangerous, vengeful, owing to an act of injustice done to him by himself, that is Frankenstein. Okay, he misses out this point completely in his argument. He never mentions it. Then he assumes that by virtue of the female creature also being born with a free will. Now, this is that entire discussion about paradise lost, the man, I mean, the fall of man, etc. I mean, if whether man's fall was predestined or it was part of the free will, okay, etc. All of this. Now he says that what if the creature, the female creature, also has free will and becomes more malicious? She also starts finding the creature, the male creature, more hideous and goes for or gets attracted to the more beautiful uh, creature of the normal human man, and if they might even hate each other, they might become even more dangerous. uh, okay, because again, recall to your mind that idea of sympathy. In Rousseau's conceptualization, uh, you become, in a sense, this idea of self-worth, or this idea of judgment about uh, what you want, or rather what you have is enough or not, comes into the picture when there is another for you to compare with. Okay, now she would have the male creature. Okay, she would also become, in a sense, just like the male creature, interested in being a part of human society. What if they both are shunned together? And since they would have witnessed human civilization, affections, and more importantly, human children, they themselves might be keen to produce, procreate. And what would happen then? They would produce a line of children. Because even if the female creature is not vengeful or envious, okay, supposing she gets the companionship of the male creature and they are both happy, etc. But the creature knows about, he has tasted knowledge of the human society. Okay, she too would come into contact with human society, its aspirations, affections, family life, the love of children, etc. And her maternal instincts would, in a sense, overtake. That is what Victor Frankenstein is saying. And what is the guarantee that they might not produce a line of creatures who would be abhorrent to man, and it would be kind of a civil war between this race of new species of creatures and human beings. So I don't know, if what do you think that please do tell me, what do you think about this dilemma, whether this dilemma is justified or not, whether Victor Frankenstein should have created a female partner for the creature and risked the risks that he has listed out, because he's not basing it on the, it's not just dependent upon the malignant nature of the creatures per se, but the fact, if you look at closely, that idea of sympathy, comparison, self-worth, etc., etc. Sympathy, of course, is, I mean, a participation with the other. Okay, not just in a benevolent sense, that of course is there, but as you come into civilization, society, that benevolence and affection and compassion would change into a competitive spirit also, because that also comes from a exercise of comparing yourself to the other. Okay, so do tell me, what do you think about this? So Victor Frankenstein, in a sense, is caught in this irreconcilable moral dilemma, which comes with power and knowledge. Whether, in a sense, would it be justified for him to exercise this knowledge and this power of creation, or uh, should he be just and fair to the creature that he's created? Now he's already committed an act of injustice by creating that being who is suffering, and now he's also, in a sense, promised him a companion. So he would be going back on his promise and bringing about a further destruction of his family and his people. So that is that this moral dilemma, in a sense, in my view at least, rescues Victor Frankenstein from an uh, uh, out and out, in a sense, negative sort of a romantic hero, that sort of a characterization. Because by virtue of denying, or by the act of denying the creature a partner, what would he be doing? He would, in a sense, putting his own loved and dear, near and dear ones, loved ones, his father, his future wife, himself, in more jeopardy and danger by denying the creature a partner, because that is the bargain that they have made. But if he creates a creature, and if there's a big if there, okay, if the creature does not keep his promise which he has made of him and his female partner retiring to some remote part of the world and living in obscurity, if they do not keep the promise, then again Victor would be responsible for a line of creatures who might again be shunned by human society and might cause destruction. But now, in again, why is it complex? Here again, there is an assumption. The assumption is that the creature and the female creature would, or even if the creature, in a sense, abides by his promise made to Frankenstein of retiring away, moving away from human society. What if the female creature does not? So these assumptions are there. The problem basically is, which actually gave us this wonderful text, is that Victor Frankenstein really did not think about these things when he was indulging in his first act of creation. So it is up to you, in a sense, to argue your case whether he is justified in denying the creature's rightful demand, or whether Victor Frankenstein, in a sense, acts quote unquote heroically and decides that, okay, I will not fulfill the demands of the creature, you destroy my family, myself, okay, but it might save the rest of mankind. So in that sense, what do you think? Okay, do write in, tell me. Okay, again, another last point about this, probably not the last point, would keep coming up if you discuss more on it, that again Victor Frankenstein's first act of creation and his denial, or its uh, refusal to indulge in a second act of creation, both rest upon his own personal idea of what is right or wrong, or what would make him a great rightful figure. In the first case, especially great, he went, in a sense, wanted to create a race of creatures. Remember, that's how he started as this. Again, it just came to my mind right now that one of the things that he wanted was to create a line of beings who would revere him. So now, by providing the female creature, he possibly could have, in a sense, fulfilled his own desire. Okay, so now this, he, after coming face to face the kind of the hideousness of his own desire, in a sense, he shuns it, and causes further injustice to the creature, and also the unjust killings of his own family members at the hand of the creature. So that's why it's a complex sort of a text. Uh, it's basically a text about the moral responsibility of power and knowledge. Okay. And probably Victor Frankenstein, had he had a more humanist education, quote unquote. What was the humanist education? This Enlightenment idea of education, where you have a rounded education in human sympathy, affections, through poetry, through polite conversations, that is, polite meaning learned conversations. That is the idea of a humanist education. Okay, that's why probably we also study in our humanities papers possibly everything. Whereas if you go to some probably engineering college or MBA or whatever, you wouldn't probably go into these questions of the just kind of political power, the nitty gritties of this, the discriminations that happen on various fault lines and so on and so forth. So, and Victor Frankenstein is a pure man of science, one stream of education, whereas the creature is more of a humanist, trained in a more humanist school of education, but he again becomes vengeful, and that's why he's also flawed. Probably Henry Clerval is one figure who is above board, and another one, Robert Walton, and we'll come to why. Because, or rather, let me put it right now there in context that Robert Walton is one creature who, by the end of the text, would decide to give up or accede or give in to the demands of his crew and not pursue this dangerous, ambitious adventure to the North Pole, and would decide to return home to his family, his domestic life, and affections. Okay, but he also does it under the pressure of his crew. Okay, probably left to him, he would have gone on his adventurous, glorious journey of finding the North Pole. And what he would have done, he would have jeopardized his own domestic bliss. But he decides to return. Okay, not saying that he has had a humanist education, but there is that degree of humanism to his sensibilities or how he looks at the world, considering he in a sense yearns for human sympathy and companionship at the beginning of the narrative. Okay, remember all of that while you read the text. Okay, and then we find that ultimately Victor Frankenstein decides to, in a sense, not follow up on his promise. And then when the creature confronts him, look how the creature addresses Victor Frankenstein. This is on page 133. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condensation. Again, that idea of worth comparison coming in. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. Okay, now the power equations have, in a sense, turned upside down. But he again tries to justify his demands and saying that shall each man find a wife for his bosom and each beast have his mate and I be alone. So in a sense the creature is even beneath animals. He is in a sense not even having a female purely sexual biological partner also. Okay, so in a sense he's not even, forget about being equal to man, he's not even in a sense equal to animals in some degrees, especially when it comes to that primal instinct of, in a sense, primal sexual instinct or primal instinct of having a partner. In the being's case, it is both as a body, as a being, although he says that he would not procreate, but perhaps more so as a human figure. He wants a companion for sympathy. I had feelings of affection, and they were requited by detestation and scorn. Man you may hate, but beware. Okay, he starts addressing him as man. Victor Frankenstein becomes a representative of man for him. The human race. And he says, beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the wiliness of a snake. Again, satanic reference, rather reference to Satan. Then he says, it is well, I go, but remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. This is the prophet, or not a prophecy, this is the threat that warning that the creature issues to Victor Frankenstein by the end of this confrontation, where Victor has refused and gone back on his promise of giving a mate to the creature. Okay, and this warning becomes a kind of a haunting for Victor Frankenstein, and no matter how hard he tries, it never leaves his head ever again. And I'll read out a couple of lines for you to note how much Victor Frankenstein, the creator, has now started resembling the creature, the being that he's created. He says on page 134, last paragraph, first two lines, I walked about the aisle like a restless spectre, ghost like figure almost, separated from all it loved and miserable in the separation. Okay, again, like Victor, the creature. But the only difference is the creature is not separated from anybody he loved because nobody really loved him. Okay, although he was fond of the DeLacy's and even they shunned him. And miserable in the separation. So complete, in a sense, although being part of the human society, but in a sense feeling as an outsider to it and not being able to participate in it. And again on page 136 he says that that he would think and he avoided with shuddering anxiety any encounter with my fellow creatures. Okay, from beings to now he's already come to creatures. So this is the kind of effect that it has had on Victor Frankenstein. And ultimately we find that he leaves that Scottish Northern Highland shore near the sea and travels back and in a sense dumps the remains of the female creature he was making into the sea, and in a sense is caught up on the Irish shores. And in the next chapter, in very curious sort of circumstances, we find that Victor Frankenstein is arrested as the potential murderer for none other than Henry Clerval. Okay, he is put into custody, he feels tortured, he acquires a fever, okay, and he raves like a madman, okay, just like remember the creature raved like a madman after the DeLacy family has shunned him and he burned their hut, etc. And he himself seems a very ghastly kind of a human being, almost possessed by the devil, quote unquote. When he is in prison, he is tormented. And nobody is able to really understand as to why he is so tormented, because Henry Clerval is of course the dearest of his friends. And again, just like Justin, it is the circumstantial evidence which in a sense goes against Victor Frankenstein, and he is in jail. And then his father visits him, etc., etc., and they decide to return to their native country. So I mean, this chapter in a sense is the fourth chapter is something, I mean, most of it you can read it yourself, so it would be, I mean, there's not much there. So then we'll move on to the next. Okay, as we move on to the next chapter, the fifth one in the third volume, page 148, again you will find Victor Frankenstein trying to absolve himself of the injustice of creating the creature and finds a justification in denying a female being to the creature, and says again that 1,000 times, middle of the page 148, 1,000 times would I have shed my own blood drop by drop to have saved their lives, but I could not, my father. Now he started rambling. Okay, he would utter things in front of his father, Elizabeth, and they would also think that he is gone mad. So he's just uttering something out of sheer despair to his father. thousand times would I have shed my blood drop by drop to have saved their lives, but I do not. My father indeed could not sacrifice the whole human race. Okay. And subsequently, we find that his father gives a letter to him, which is by Elizabeth, where Elizabeth thinks that Victor Frankenstein would be in love with another, that's why he's being away, etc., so on and so forth. Uh, and her letter keeps reminding of any mention of Elizabeth, in fact, keeps reminding him of the warning of the creature, and he feels that, uh, in a sense, I mean, he's in a sense in a position where he cannot really explain to anybody else what his predicament is, and neither can he suffer in silence like a sentimental hero. And this is a point evoked on page 152, the second paragraph, this comparison between the romantic agony and the despair of the sentimental hero. And he says, page 152, second paragraph, it is well for the unfortunate to be resigned, but for the guilty there is no peace. The agonies of remorse poison the luxury there is otherwise sometimes found in indulging the excess of grief. Basically, again, a very typical romantic notion, which you would have read in a few poems by now, that indulging in the excesses of grief, melancholy, etc., has its own beauty. Autumn thou has its own beauty too. So is the Ode to Dejection. Okay, Ode to the Nightingale, again, same sort of messages are there. But he says that what makes him burn with agony is that he knows that somewhere deep down inside that he's also guilty of the kind of predicament he's brought about, not only for himself but also for his family members. Probably he's not feeling this for the monster. He is not feeling guilty or remorse for the monster. Okay, somewhere in the narrative, I'm forgetting exactly which page, which line, he says that I'm not guilty, but I was blameless. Talking to Robert Walton. Okay, this agony and remorse he feels is for being responsible for the murder of William, Justin, and subsequently Elizabeth Clerval, but not for the monster per se or the creature. Okay. And he says that if up till now what he's been thinking is on his wedding night the creature would come and kill him. Okay, so he feels that I should hasten the process of marriage as soon as I can, and in a sense bring closer that night of the marriage so that I can be in combat with the creature and either he survives or I. And that would be the end of his agony, or in a sense, it would be an end of the creature once and for all. What he is not suspecting up till now, which he finally does, page 152, the last line. But as if possessed of magic powers, the monster had blinded me to his real intentions. Who has the magic power of talk? Satan. So in a sense, he is in a sense thinking perhaps of the creature as who ought to have been his Lucifer has now become his Satan because of the dare of, in a sense, wanting equality and wanting equality to man, the human race, etc. Okay. The monster had blinded me to his real intentions, and when I thought that I prepared only for my own death on the wedding night, perhaps, I hastened that of a far dearer victim, which you can obviously guess would be Elizabeth. Okay. And the marriage preparations ensue and follow, and there is a beautiful scene of the lake, the sunset, the beauties of nature, the picturesque scene, page 154, that description is there. But as it happens again and again in the text, Either be it some sublime sort of an imagery, or there is a picturesque imagery. The effect of it on Frankenstein and in the narrative is mostly by and large of doom, of impending doom. In a sense, the picturesque beauty of nature or the sublime power of the Alps in the beginning of the narrative are always juxtaposed and contrasted by something hideous in the eyes of Victor Frankenstein. That is the creature or danger. Okay, there is a sense of foreboding. It has been there since the beginning of the first murder of William, and from that part on. Okay, so do keep this picturization, these sceneries in mind. Okay, and finally, by page 186, 156, you would find that Elizabeth is found murdered, and the description or the picturization of that episode is uh, likened to a painting by Henry Fuseli, Nighttime Rape. The nightmare is given in the note, bottom of page 156, lending sexual overtones to the attack. Okay, and I mean, one can read it as that, because why does the creature kill Elizabeth? Because he wanted to deny Victor Frankenstein a beloved, a partner. So the sexual overtones are there. Nowhere there is suggested that there is sexual consummation between Elizabeth and the creature. Now that is a classic trope and element of the Gothic novel. The sexual, in a sense, the potential sexual transgression between the human and the more than human, the supra-human, the para-human, or whatever you might want to call it. Okay, that overtone is pretty much there. Okay, and page 158, he says, recounting his sorrow, a fiend had snatched from me every hope of future happiness. No creature had ever been so miserable as I was. So frightening an event is single in this. Okay, basically saying a fiend had snatched from me every hope of future happiness. No creature had ever been so miserable as I was. If you are a careful reader, this should echo something to you. And these are something of the very same sort of words that the creature has said about Victor Frankenstein. Okay, that he has robbed him of every happiness, future happiness, uh, and he is the most miserable creature on earth. And again, I mean, he's confined to a solitary cell because he has a complete breakdown, and again, his, in a sense, dissociation from human society becomes greater and greater. His final sort of hope and uh, outlet or escape from the terrors of the creature was his marriage with Elizabeth, and now that is over. So probably he has absolutely no hope of a partner. In a sense, his uh, identification with the creature is pretty much complete. Okay, vis-a-vis human society, affections, and companionship. Both are pretty much on the same page at the same level now. Okay, and plus there is one thing that I forgot to mention, that by this time Victor Frankenstein's father has also died because of the grief, etc. he had to suffer in his old age. Okay, uh, now a curious sort of a passage in the text where Victor Frankenstein tries to take the help of the law to nab and catch the creature. He goes to a magistrate, narrates his story, etc. That's the final resort for him. And again, in this episode, you would find, this is on page 159. Again, you would find how, in a sense, of course, uh, the creature would not be hauled up by law, would not, his justice would not be served either to Frankenstein or the creature within the ambit of normal human institutions of law, judiciary, etc. Okay. Uh, but the key point here is that again you would find that anxiety of the author coming out on the surface, coming to the fore, where while narrating his strange supernatural seeming story to a magistrate, Victor Frankenstein, in a sense, himself says that the story is too connected to be mistaken for a dream, and I have no motives for falsehood. Don't think I'm just rambling. Okay, again, talking to the reader. Why is this anxiety there in the novelist to come to reassure the reader by virtue of certain characters in the text? Why? And he said that to Robert Walton, he said that even Victor, even the creature, while narrating a story about Seyfi, remember, said that I have documentary evidence of Seyfi's letter, so please believe what I am saying. There is factual proof. Okay, remember the preface, remember all this, and again Victor Frankenstein's anxiety to the while talking to the magistrate, that this is a narrative which is too connected. Okay, it is too rational in that sense. It cannot be made up. It cannot be a work of fancy, pure imagination. Okay, I now related my history briefly, but with firmness and precision, making the dates with accuracy, again ensuring that his tale is taken to be factual, and never deviating from invective or exclamation, so nothing heightened. Okay, also to ensure that the magistrate doesn't think that his tale is all, in a sense, a rant in a state of delirium and madness. Okay, talking to the anticipator, the talking to the anticipated reader, in a sense, and he continues. The magistrate, look at the magistrate's reaction on listening to the story. The magistrate appeared at first perfectly incredulous, but as I continued, he became more attentive and interested. I saw him sometimes shudder with horror, at others a lively surprise, unmingled with disbelief, was contained on his countenance. Unmingled with disbelief, so there was no disbelief on the part of the magistrate. So the magistrate, in a sense, could be read as an assumed sort of the intended reader of the text. Okay, where you are asked to read it not as a supernatural gothic tale or a popular romance, but uh, as a text or as a piece of fiction that can be real. Okay, so there is the tension between that claims to realism. Again and again, he'll use the word history while talking about the stories of characters and while his own story also. Okay, reinforcing that idea of fact in fiction. Okay. Then he says, this address caused a considerable change in the physiognomy of my auditor. Last paragraph, 159 again. He had heard my story with that half kind of belief that is given to a tale of spirits and supernatural events. But when he was called upon to act officially in consequence, the whole tide of his incredulity returned. Okay. He, however, answered mildly, basically saying that there was that half kind of belief that he was able to inspire in the magistrate, but when it came to, in a sense, record it, in a sense, officially, uh, the incredulity returned, in a sense, that kind of disbelief returned from the magistrate's part. Because, of course, I mean, even if the story is remotely true in some sense, it is not probably that would be believed in a court of law. I assume that, I mean, you can understand that. Uh, And then, after the magistrate refused to register a complaint, making all sorts of excuses, basically saying that the creature would be too powerful, too, as you have described him, he is too strong to be caught up by the police, etc. Victor Frankenstein says, but I perceive your thoughts. Page 160. You do not credit my narrative and do not intend to pursue my enemy with the punishment with which is his desert. As I spoke, rage sparkled in my eyes. the magistrate was intimidated. You are mistaken, etc., etc. Okay, so magistrate thinks that he's, I mean, really enraged, so on and so forth. But again, this anxiety of driving home the point about the narrative, its factual possibility because it's based on an event of science. So please keep all of this in mind when you're discussing the text as, in a sense, a kind of reworking or uh, uh, a text which uses various tropes of the Gothic popular genre to talk about something more profound, in the sense, various theories of the Enlightenment, the Romantic ideology, etc., etc. Okay, and he knows that the magistrate is not going to pursue. So all that was left in Victor Frankenstein was this passion which was consuming his soul for revenge. That is all he is left with. Again, echoing the creature, and in a sense, that is one thing that mm, brings the creature, Victor Frankenstein, and Satan on a common plane, that hunger and thirst for revenge. Okay, although their causes might, or the reasons for that revenge might be different, but they are, in a sense, driven by that consuming passion. Okay, and he was very angry, Victor Frankenstein. He says that and the magistrate endeavored to soothe him as a nurse does a child, and reverted to my tale as an act effects of delirium. Man, how ignorant art thou in thy pride of wisdom! Cease, you know not what it is you say. That is Victor Frankenstein to the magistrate. But perhaps in the first line, how ignorant art thou in thy pride of wisdom, is an ironic comment of Victor Frankenstein upon himself, unintentionally made, while venting out his anger on the magistrate. Okay, as we go into the next chapter, in the next 4 or 5 pages, I mean, beginning of chapter 7 to page 167, this is about 6 7 pages. You will find a lot of these stereotypes of the Gothic, where Victor Frankenstein goes to the graves of his family members and howls and screams, and there is the creature, and I mean, in a sense, the all sort of typical scenes that you'll find in uh, Gothic text, horror stories, horror romances, okay, popular narratives. He uses them. Oh, sorry, Mary Shelley uses them. She uses them uh, to evoke that sense of eeriness in the text, but again, not as the presence of a ghost or a spirit, but Victor Frankenstein himself, that man of science, that is the irony again. The man of science, in a sense, feels that he's, in a sense, guided by a spirit, his spirits, to in his quest for revenge. Okay, and this is on page 167, where he, in a sense, he says, "Oh, middle of the page. When will my guiding spirit in conducting me to the demon allow me the rest I so much desire? Or must I die and yet live? If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape. That you will seek him." Basically, now he's talking to Robert Walton and says that. Uh, 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 narrating his story, now he's come to the present, in a sense, talking to Robert Walton and saying that if, in case, I'm not able to avenge, or I'm not able to seek revenge, have my revenge on the creature, please, you do it on my part. Again, a very unjust, unfair kind of a task he's given to Robert Walton. Okay. At this moment, later on, he might reverse it. And then he says, "Yet, of course," here itself he does that, "yet do I dare ask you to undertake my pilgrimage to endure the hardship that I have undergone? No, I am not so selfish. But again, he would echo the same thing. Please take revenge on my behalf, so on and so forth. Okay, and as we move closer to the end of this narrative, we again find the same thing that we just talked about. Mary Shelley wanting to reinforce this idea that this story is credible. There is credulity to this strange narrative, and now in a different sort of a guise, a ploy, echoing the same thing. Now it is Robert Walton speaking in his voice to his sister. Okay, page 167, the letter begins. Now he's speaking to his sister, that is Robert Walton is talking, and now he is talking about again the same thing. Uh, First thing that you should keep in mind is Robert Walton is slightly misguided and taken in by the kind of, in a sense, uh, the kind of self flagelling and the kind of, uh, I mean, the kind of character sketch that Victor Frankenstein makes of his own self. Remember, he is the narrator of his own story to Robert Walton, for the most part, which we have read thus far. Okay, so initially, Robert Walton is thinking that Victor Frankenstein is a nice man, he's such a wonderful man who has come to such a fate. So we can also, in a sense, question, or we should question, as to what kind of a judge is Robert Walton of character. Initially, remember at the very beginning, he was given to be a good judge of human sympathy, narrating a story about his captain or some person on the ship. Now, in a sense, after reading the story of Victor Frankenstein yourselves, you should ask whether Robert Walton has judged Victor Frankenstein in a fair light. Is he being too light on him, not critical enough? You have to think. But again, as I mentioned, he talks about, in a sense, Mary Shelley again talks about, through Robert Walton now, page 168. Robert Walton says, his tale is connected, it's the same idea, and told with an appearance of the simplest truth. Yet I own to you that the letters of Felix and Sephi, which he shewed me, and the apparition of the monster seen from our ship, remember, Walton has also got a glimpse of the creature, brought to me a greater conviction of the truth of his narrative than his asseverations. Basically, meaning visual, factual evidence of having seen the creature, having seen the letters of Felix and Sephi, gives Victor Frankenstein's oral narration a backup, a kind of a, in a sense, stronger evidence which backs Victor Frankenstein's oral narrative. This textual narrative, or that the textual evidence, and in a sense the visual evidence of having seen the creature. Very, very crucial again. Okay, but as a reader, you don't have any of it. Neither have you seen Victor Frankenstein or any of the creatures. So, should you also believe Robert Walton, the nice, good hearted man, that the evidence that he's seen is, in a sense, uh, or rather, the evidence that Robert Walton has seen, is it also enough for the reader? Because ultimately, any reader of anything, even history, you have not seen history either, if any reader of any text, in a sense, has to make some sort of a contract with the text and the author, where you would have to come to some mutual understanding of how much and what exactly is believable, how much do you want to believe, and on what grounds. So if Robert Walton is slightly gullible a character, because he's clearly sympathetic to Victor Frankenstein, not scathing at all, probably we would be, perhaps, maybe not. So Do we believe his judgment of Victor Frankenstein and the narrative? The only thing we can believe him on is yes, he must have seen the evidence. He would not be lying as a character. Okay, so he's seen evidence of the veracity of the claims of Victor Frankenstein. Okay. Okay. And he says that the letters and the apparition of the monster brought to me a greater conviction of truth of his narrative, however earnest and connected they may be. Such a monster has then really existence, I cannot doubt it, yet I am lost in surprise and admiration. Sometimes I endeavor to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of his creature's formation, but on this point he was impenetrable. Okay, so Robert Walton asks Victor Frankenstein for the formula, the method of creating that being, and he says, "Are you mad, my friend? Or whither dost thou senseless curiosity lead you? Would you also create for yourself and the world a demoniacal enemy?" Okay. Frankenstein discovered that I made notes concerning his history. Again, he's also taking evidence. He asked to see them. So, first, before going on, keep this in mind. This idea that Victor Frankenstein denying information to Robert Walton or to anybody else about how he went about creating that being is a typical Enlightenment trope where one figure and his story and his narrative becomes a kind of an example that if it is good you follow, if it is not good you do not follow. So in Enlightenment thought and writing, novels, texts, histories, one of the primary functions of these forms of writing was to portray, sketch examples in certain situations and circumstances where you would draw some moral lessons out of them, okay, which either you would emulate, or should not emulate. Okay, here of course Victor Frankenstein himself is setting an example by saying, please do not follow my example. You have seen what my creation has done, so you do not get any knowledge, forbidden knowledge of forbidden knowledge which I possessed, so I'm not giving it to you. I made that error, so that now that I've made it, you do not make it any further or exacerbate the problem further. So again, is Victor Frankenstein not as bad as we think? Making a mistake, an error, he does not create a second creature, neither gives the knowledge to another. Okay, probably he could have written a tract and become immortal in the history of human sciences and natural philosophy as the one who created that being and does not record or has recorded the methods of that creation, that piece of knowledge. He could have done that, but he does not. Okay. Again, if you stretch the analogy, he is somewhat, in a sense, following in the footsteps of Cornelius Agrippa, who was supposed to be, in a sense, said to have had possessed that supernatural knowledge, but he, in a sense, destroyed his own work by the end. So he is following that tradition of his heroes of natural philosophy. But you'll have to argue that point properly, in a sense, to make it. Okay. Again, another interesting thing that we would find about Victor Frankenstein, and which brings in a dubious sort of characteristic to him. Not dubious in terms of his any behavior or anything, but in a sense, not dubious, let that word be. In a sense, a trait, a thing that he does which should make you look at Victor Frankenstein with some suspicion and still. And here goes the narrative, 168 again. Frankenstein discovered that I made notes concerning his history. He asked to see them and then himself corrected and augmented them in many places. So he's the editor, but principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversation he held with his enemy. Since you have preserved my narration, said he, I would not that a mutilated one should go down to posterity. Okay, so now he is also the editor, we know, of the tale. So whatever you were reading now by now, in the hand or in the words of Robert Walton as he transcribed or rather transcripted them, uh, now we find out that parts of it, particularly if the exchanges between him and the creature, some editing has been done by Victor Frankenstein. Who knows what has he modified and not modified? Although he says that there are certain things that he modified concerning uh, uh, principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversation he held with his enemy. So we never quite know exactly what. Okay. Thus a week passed away while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever imagination formed. My thoughts and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest of my guest. This is Walton speaking. Again, the strangest tale that imagination ever formed. Also based on text. So imagination is not pure fairy tale fancy. So imagination is what it, in a sense, takes up a text or takes up raw material and, in a sense, adds sort of color to it. So this is uh, again not clear cut in a sense as to what does he mean when he says, while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever imagination formed. Okay, just now say after having said that he has in a sense looked at documents, verified in a sense, corroborated the evidence with the narration of Victor Frankenstein, so on and so forth. My thoughts and my feelings of and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest for my guest, which this tale and his own elevated and gentle manner has created. Okay. So again, as I said, Robert Walton thinks of Victor Frankenstein as a man of gentle manners and elevated gentle manners and thought. Okay. Which is for you to judge again. Okay, and there are a little more, some rather, there are some more brushes of uh, sentiment and sensibility that are added to the character of Victor Frankenstein after the narrative ends. Okay, and this is what uh, Robert Wharton has to say, page 169, top of the page. Our conversations are not always confined to his own history. He's talking about now, are not always confined, okay, after the narration of the story, and misfortunes. On every point of general literature, he displays unbounded knowledge and a quick and piercing apprehension. Apprehension meaning not tension, but some apprehension, the ability to apprehend, understand. His eloquence is forcible and touching, nor can I hear him when he relates a pathetic incident or endeavors to move the passions of pity or love without tears. So, Victor Frankenstein claims, or Robert Walton feels through his conversation of Victor Frankenstein, that he is also well learned in general literatures in other fields of knowledge, which he in a sense abandons when he is uh, consumed by that passion of scientific creation of the creature, the being. Okay. Also, something else he shares with, this is also that means he shares with the creature, but he does not put into practice until now. This general knowledge of general things. Also, he shares with the creature eloquence, the ability to speak, to move you with speech. Satan also had that quality. Okay. speech, in a sense, can be used, uh, in a sense, used to, in a sense, uh, influence you. It is all the time. And what does he say? That his eloquence, when he was relating a pathetic incident, that is, an incident of evoking pity or love, etc. Walton says that I wasn't able to restrain or control my tears from flowing when I would listen to Victor Frankenstein narrate something, which means that he's a powerful narrator. Again, if he's a powerful narrator, so eloquent, uh, how fact of the matter and reliable was his narration about the creature and what transpired between him and the creature, and what did he say? I mean, whatever that he said throughout the narrative. Okay, so gift of the gab, eloquence, is all shared by Satan, the creature, and Victor Frankenstein. There is nothing to suggest, by the way, that he's, in a sense, lying or anything, but do keep this in mind. What a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity, when he is thus noble and godlike in ruin. Robert Walton is completely floored by Victor Frankenstein, it seems. Okay, noble and glorious and godlike even now in ruin. After having listened to his tale, Robert Walton is not able to see any wrong in Victor Frankenstein as such. So he was glorious to begin with. He seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. So, in a sense, what, in a sense, redeems Victor Frankenstein in the eyes of Robert Walton is that Victor Frankenstein knows his self worth and the greatness of his fall. He is a tragic hero in the eyes of Robert Walton. Okay. Again, that idea of worth, Rousseau always keep in mind how it makes things complex for human beings and society. And the irony here is that it was Victor Frankenstein feeling his own great worth to begin with that brought about this catastrophe. Okay. And then Victor Frankenstein, in a sense, Robert Walton quotes what Victor Frankenstein, or rather, Victor Frankenstein speaks. When he was younger, my feelings were profound, uh, but I possessed a coolness of judgment fitted for illustrious achievement. The sentiment of the worth of my nature supported me. Again, okay. Now, how much has this sense of worth been a cause of his downfall? Whether this is also understood by Victor Frankenstein by now, we doubt it. When others would have been oppressed, for I deemed it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents that might be useful to my fellow creatures. That was his initial design. When I reflected on the work I had completed, no less a man than the creature of a sensitive and rational animal, no one less than the creation of a senseless and rational animal, I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors, that is, common people of adventure, science, etc. He thought that himself he was someone higher because someone more superior in ability and talent and knowledge that he has created the creature. Okay, just read all of this very, very carefully and closely as to understand if Victor Frankenstein and Robert Walton are good at character analysis. Is Robert Walton a fair judge of character of Victor Frankenstein? Is Victor Frankenstein himself a fair judge of his own character? Is he fairly judged the creature? Okay. But this feeling, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me lower in the dust. All my speculations and hope are as nothing, and like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am chained in an eternal hell. So Victor Frankenstein has understood what his self-worth has done to him. Okay, he is. This is probably the first admission in very clear terms of his own, uh, how his own sense of self-worth has been a reason for his fall. And like the archangel, now he likens himself to Satan. Remember earlier in the narrative, uh, the creature likens his own person, his own self to uh, Lucifer when he was talking to Victor Frankenstein, his creator. The creature has said, I felt as if I was Lucifer, but I was cast out like, or rather, he says that I ought to have been thy Adam, but I was cast out from your uh, confines, cast out from your world like Satan, Lucifer, the archangel. That is what the same word he mentions. Now it is the reversal. Victor Frankenstein feels that he is fallen like the archangel. Okay, he was the bright one, Lucifer. Okay, and now he is fallen into. Uh, now, in a sense, he's a fallen angel. He's become, and because he's chained in an eternal hell, like Satan is supposed to be. Okay. Uh, just a second. Okay, so as of now, we feel that Victor Frankenstein has understood the dangers of human ambition, overreach, etc. Okay, but ironically, when a similar situation arises for Robert Walton, we find Victor Frankenstein going back to his own fascination for heroism and adventure. Now, look at page 171. In the middle of the page, you will find that uh, uh, the sailors are also moved by, in a sense, the eloquence of Robert Walton, so on and so forth. So, in fact, come to page 172, where we find that by now the ship is stuck in ice and they are waiting for the ice to melt so that they can, in a sense, resume their voyage. But the sailors are of the opinion that it is the crew of Robert Walton is of the opinion that it is too dangerous to proceed further and they should return. Okay. Uh, and this is what he says, third line, Sun 72. They desired, therefore, that I should engage with a solemn promise that if the vessel should be freed, I would instantly direct my course southwards. That is back, not to the North Pole, but southwards. Okay. He was also concerned, but he says that, yet could I in justice or even in possibility refuse this demand? Now, Robert Walton himself wants to go ahead to the North Pole, but he is wondering whether uh, is he in the right or is he correct in following his ambition, directing his crew because he is the captain of the ship, or listening to his crew and returning back home. Okay. Now he tells the situation, informs about the situation to Victor Frankenstein, discusses with him, and Victor Frankenstein goes on for about a page 172 onwards. I mean, talking about the greatness of human ambition. Okay, and he uses his power of eloquence again to motivate the crew and says, what do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Do you call him this a glorious expedition? And whereof was it glorious? It is glorious because it involves the danger and death, danger of death. Okay. Uh, and that you would be hailed as benefactors of the human species if you find a shortcut to the North Pole and learn more about the magnetic field and so on and so forth. And Uh, and he says, instead, you choose to return to your warm firesides, that is home, the home and hearth and domestic bliss. Okay. Oh, be men, be more than men. This is what he says. Again, after having himself acknowledged that he aspired to be like the omnipotent archangel Lucifer and hence he has fallen, he is exhorting other men to put their lives in danger in the name of science, human advancement. Now, scientists do that. Probably many who would be going under trials for vaccines for the coronavirus would be putting themselves at risk because vaccines are not really issued out in public from the beginning. They are, in a sense, first tried in laboratory conditions on those who volunteer, etc. They are also working in the name of science. People go on expeditions, go on Mars, etc. I mean, plan to go on Mars, go on the moon, in the space in the name of science. So, whether you should, what is the question here? The question is not if pursuing great goals for human advancement in the name of science, whether this is wrong or not, but the moral dilemma is that of a captain. The captain of the ship wants to go ahead. He is in charge of the mission and he is also in charge of the lives of his men, his crew. They do not want to go forward because they see no point in going forward. Okay, so does the captain give in to the concerns and demands of the rest of the crew whose life he's in charge of? Or does he, in a sense, accede to their demands? Okay, Victor Frankenstein is of the opinion that be more than men. Okay, pursue glory, pursue science ambition. You would bring disrepute and shame to your captain if you break. Go back on this voyage, return from this voyage. He spoke last two lines. He spoke this with a voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of lofty design and heroism that can you wonder that these men were moved? The men are motivated. They looked at one another, etc. I told them to retire, and they decided that they would continue northwards. Okay, and rather he says that I would not lead them further north if they strenuously desired the contrary, but he hopes that they go forward. And soon after, amazingly, Victor Frankenstein now dies. So amazingly, this is his last contribution to human society. Okay, trying to inspire the crew to go ahead and court danger and death in the name of science. Okay. And Walton also says, I had rather die than return shamefully, my purpose unfulfilled. Okay. And then uh, later on, he again writes on September 7th, I have consented to return. Okay. If we are not destroyed, thus are my hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision of the crew. I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience. Okay. Now, Robert Walton feels that he is, in a sense, this is injustice to his ambition, that he has to give in to the demands of the crew. Okay. But what do you think? Whether he is acted justly, fairly? Either he should have been able to motivate his crew to go ahead, or that is what I think. But if they are of the opinion that there is no point in proceeding further and they are more concerned about their safety, they're going back to their family, is he right in giving into their demands? Okay, and ultimately, soon after, we find that Victor Frankenstein has died. In fact, a bit of a correction here in the sense that those are not the last word of Victor Frankenstein, but uh, uh, Robert Walton narrates a final conversation that he has with Victor, and there actually you find the indecisiveness of Victor Frankenstein. Uh, they, I mean, Victor Walton informs Victor Frankenstein that finally they would be returning. Victor Frankenstein says that, but I will not, because his only passion is to seek revenge on the creature, etc. Uh, and somewhere in the middle, he says, page 174, he says, during these last days, I have been occupied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable. In a fit of enthusiastic madness, I created a rational creature and was bound towards him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well being. This was my duty, but there was another still paramount to that. My duties towards my fellow creatures had greater claims to my attention, because they included a greater proportion of happiness or misery. Urged by this view, I refused, and I did right in refusing to create a companion for the first creature. Okay, so he's not taking even the blame for the first misconduct, which he probably should have. And perhaps in the second half of his argument, he is right. He is not given a creature, perhaps that too, because there again, he is assuming the backtracking of the creature on the promise and the maliciousness of the second creature he would give. Okay, but he's always constantly trying to justify his own actions. Okay. Uh, and he almost makes a wish or hopes that Walton would take revenge after his death, revenge from the creature. But he says that, page 175, I dare not ask you to do what I think right, for I may still be misled by passion. So now he's, in a sense, said, let me not give you any advice. I am a creature. So Victor Frankenstein is a creature who, in a state of passion, changes his views according to the passion he is currently possessed by. Okay. Uh, he's not able to, in a sense, uh, convince his own self whether his own actions were in the right or wrong entirely. Okay, he's constantly, jostling between two sides of his own self. One that sees himself as wanting to be omnipotent like the archangel and hence fallen, and the other as someone who is not caused more injustice to mankind at large, even if it was more injustice to the creature by not creating the second being. Okay, this is a dilemma he's caught up in, and he's not able to resolve until his death. Okay, and he says that, farewell, Watson, page 175, middle. Seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. So go back home. That's what is word. Yet why do I say this? I have myself been blasted in these hopes. Yet another may succeed. So now he's again. So this he is that typical equivocating kind of a creature, primarily because he's not able to decide for himself, almost Hamlet-like. So one point he's saying, give up, be ambitious, pursue your goals. I would have in your place. Then he says, go back home, seek happiness in tranquility, avoid ambition. And then he says, why I'm saying this? Perhaps the other person's endeavors are more just and fair and worthy, and yet another may succeed. And he dies. Okay, a good point perhaps for Victor Frankenstein to die in the text without being able to resolve the contradictions that define his character. Okay. He began as an affectionate man, as a man of family affections, and then consumed by passion, and he's not able to decide by the end. Okay. Okay, and one of the last major great scenes of this narrative is Robert Walton finding the creature bending over the body of Victor Frankenstein and weeping. Okay, this is a great typical, scene of sentiment where the creature is, and Robert Walton. You must give it to Robert Walton for not shrieking and running away from the creature. Perhaps because he's heard about the creature and his story through Victor Frankenstein. Uh, Perhaps that is the reason he is not scared and he is willing to have a conversation with him. And when Victor Frankenstein, or rather, when Robert Walton calls Victor Frankenstein a generous being, look at what the creature says. Oh, Frankenstein, middle of page 176. Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me, I who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovest, etc. And he recounts all the torture and all the pain and suffering that he, Victor, the creature, had to go through. Okay. Uh, and on seeing the creature, the first feelings of Robert Walton are that my first impulse, he says, which has suggested me the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend in destroying his enemy, were now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. Okay. And he says, your repentance, I said, is now superfluous, etc., etc., and that your vengeance is diabolical, etc. So Robert Walton's idea of the creature is shaped by Victor Frankenstein's narrative, and remember, he was also the editor of specifically those parts of the narrative where he's having a conversation with the creature. Okay. Uh, and the creature narrates his own tale in his own voice, and that, in a sense, uh, makes a difference. Okay, page 177, he says, my heart was fashioned to be susceptible to love and sympathy, and wretched by misery of vice and hatred. It had not endured the violence of the change without torture, such as you cannot even imagine. That is what the creature says, that you cannot even imagine the kind of torture I went through. Uh, and you would find that uh, the creature says that even in killing William and the others, he went through a lot of pain and misery in committing those acts of sin. And he felt the torture and the pain of turning from a gentle, affectionate, sensitive creature into a hideous monster more than those who suffered. Okay, this is the argument of the creature in his own voice now. And uh, we find that Walton's assessment of the creature is still dominantly shaped by Victor's narrative. Okay, and this is what Robert Walton says. 177, last paragraph. I was at first touched by the expressions of his misery. Yet when I called to mind what Frankenstein had said of his creature's powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when I again cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, indignation was rekindled within me. Okay, so you find that uh, uh, Victor Frankenstein's narration has been powerful to cast the creature in a particular light, and this continues to influence uh, Robert Walton. And to drive this point home, the creature, in a sense, points that out to Robert Walton on page 178, and he says, and this brings this idea of the dubious or the doubtful, suspicious nature of this layered narrative into the mix, into the it brings it center stage. The creature says, 178, You who call Frankenstein your friend seem to have a knowledge of my crimes and his misfortunes. My crimes and his misfortunes. But in the detail which he gave you of them, he could not sum up the hours and months of misery which I endured wasting in impotent passions. Okay. And then he recounts of the pain that he went through. Uh, Also, we find that so Robert Walton, his assessment of narrative of characters, our assessment of narratives and characters in this multi-layered text, whose voice, whose story are you listening to or reading, in whose narrative voice becomes very crucial. Okay, and of course there is no final word as such, so don't expect me or anybody to give you this final word about how much of the narrative might have been played around with by Victor Frankenstein, etc. But you can say this for some degree, with some degree of conviction and doubt about Victor Frankenstein, that he is never scathing enough of his own uh, wrongs in his treatment of the creature. Okay. Whereas if you contrast the creature and his take on his own actions, look at what he says on 179. This will give you an idea about how the creature sees his own self. But it is true that I am a wretch, page 179 top. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept and grasped to death his throat who never injured me or any other living thing. So he recounts all his murders. Okay. I have devoted my creator, the select specimen, all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. So his creature was a very good man, but I had turned him miserable. I have pursued him even to that irremediable ruin where there he lies, etc., etc. And that he went through a great torture doing all this, and there was no other outlet for him than revenge and passion. So that also makes the creature a kind of a tragic figure. Okay, but at least what you'll find in the creature is an acknowledgement of, uh, in a sense, his crimes. Uh, Victor Frankenstein also, in a sense, acknowledges the fact that he has committed, in a way, he's a murderer of William, Justin, and Elizabeth, but he's not quite stringently critical of the fact that he's been really unkind and unjust to the creature. He's critical of the fact that he's made him. He's critical of the fact that he cannot provide him with a partner. He has reasons for it. But he's not quite critical enough of the fact that he has abandoned the creature without any nurturing. Okay, so he's been the worst kind of parent in that sense. And the irony is, he himself had such a perfect set of parents, so he should have known better, but he does not. Okay, and the narrative then ends with the creature, in a sense, disappearing in darkness, in a sense, proclaiming that he would destroy his own self. So, whether he does that or not, we do not know. But the irony is that he did not come into being without his own will. Nobody of us do. But he was completely abandoned. And now he is left with the difficult and the torturous task of destroying his own self, perhaps the only means by which he can find peace. And that was the end of Victor Frankenstein. He found no peace until he died. Perhaps that would also be the end of the creature. Okay, so quite a long discussion, long talk today, long lecture, and it was long overdue also. Uh, so we will end it here for today, and I hope you read the text, listen to the talks, lectures, and they are helpful to you. Uh, I know you would find them a little boring because there is no interaction as such, but it's difficult to, in a sense, have 50, 60 odd people present simultaneously at the same time and have these. Uh, but I would really encourage you to listen to them, give in some feedback, ask questions. Okay. Do take care of yourselves. Uh, I will send you some uh, clips, videos of the background readings. Go through them. Some of the discussions we have had about various topics. I know you will not find the exact discussion uh, there in our lectures as there is in the essays, because I mean the essays are written in a particular context, they're making a certain point. uh, our discussions were basically meant to alert you, open you up uh, to various as many interpretations as possible. One thing we have not touched much on is the figure of the creature in um the figure of the monster in revolutionary writings and politics. Uh, for that, you would have to learn a little bit about the politics of the French Revolution. A good big chunks of the discussions are there in the first essay in the background readings. So if you have any doubts about them, do talk to me. Send in your queries. Okay, but do keep in mind that it is never a simple cut, copy, paste sort of application of theories, the Gothic element, or the revolution, how the monster is conjured up in the revolution talk. Okay. Uh, and a direct application of all these ideas, Enlightenment, Rousseau, to a particular character whole and soul, a particular situation whole and soul. So there are multiple strands intertwined of these various concepts and ideas in the narrative, and hence it is so juicy, difficult, and hence fun, perhaps. Uh, okay, so please do take care of yourself. With this, we come to an end of Victor Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's. I hope you liked the text. And now we would be beginning with her husband, uh, P.B. Shelley. Okay, so, and in a couple of days, we will start with those lectures and discussions. So, thanks a lot and take care of yourselves. Bye.